In February of 1989, a journalist from the Folha de Sao Paulo sat down with Brazil's biggest rock star for an interview. The rock star was 30 years old. He was visibly thin. He had been sick for a while, and everyone in the industry knew it, but no one had said it out loud yet. The journalist asked the question, and the rock star answered it the way he answered everything, directly, without flinching. "Write it down," he said. "The cursed thing is AIDS." His name was Cazuza. He had about 18 months to live, and he had no intention of spending any of them pretending. Before we go deeper, Brazilian music is one of the richest, most layered music cultures on earth. Rock, samba, tropicalia, funk, forró. It invented genres that shaped what the entire world listens to today. I've spent years inside this music, tracking stories that never properly crossed the ocean. If that sounds like a rabbit hole worth going down, subscribe before this video ends. New episodes every week, and everyone opens a door you didn't know existed. Cazuza was born Agenor de Miranda Araújo Neto in Rio de Janeiro on April 4, 1958. His father was João Araújo, one of the most powerful music producers in Brazil, the man who built the Som Livre label, the man who knew everyone. His mother, Lucinha, would become one of the most important figures in his story. Growing up in a music industry family in Rio gave Cazuza access and exposure. It did not, it turns out, make him easy to manage. He was passionate, combustible, magnetic, and almost impossible to contain. He wrote in surges. He performed with the kind of intensity that made audiences feel like something important was happening. He had a voice that carried weight, rough at the edges, emotional without being sentimental, the kind of voice that made lyrics land differently. In 1981, he joined a band called Barão Vermelho. They were part of the first wave of Brazilian rock in the post-dictatorship years. Loud, electric, unapologetically noisy in a musical culture that had been shaped by bossa nova and MPB. The band released 3 albums between 1982 and 1984. They toured. They built a following. They became, for a stretch of the early 80s, one of the most important rock bands in the country. But Cazuza was always going to be too large for a band. In 1985, he left Barão Vermelho and went solo. The move felt risky. It turned out to be the right call. His first solo album came out in 1985. So Se Fora Dois followed in 1986. And then, in 1988, came Ideologia, an album that captured something exact about Brazil in that moment. The dictatorship was over. The country was building a new democracy. There was euphoria and also disillusionment. Cazuza wrote about both. Ideologia opened with a line that became one of the most quoted in Brazilian rock history. "I want to see the ox dance." The song was about hypocrisy, about the gap between what people said they believed and how they actually lived. It was not subtle. It was not meant to be. He followed it with a live album, O Tempo Não Para, I Can't Stop Time, recorded in 1988, as his illness was becoming impossible to hide. The title track would become his most enduring song, a lament, an accusation, a love letter to life, all compressed into 4 minutes. The live recording catches something that studio recordings often miss: the sheer physical presence of someone performing at the edge of what they can do and choosing to do it anyway. By 1988, Cazuza knew he was HIV positive. The virus had no effective treatment. AZT existed in theory, but access in Brazil was nearly impossible. His immune system was failing, his body was changing, and he kept working. In February of 1989, he told the Folha de Sao Paulo reporter the truth. The story ran. Brazil read it. And then, in April of that year, Veja magazine, the country's biggest news weekly, put Cazuza on its cover. The headline read, "Cazuza, uma vítima da AIDS, agoniza em praça pública." Cazuza, an AIDS victim, agonizes in public. The photographs showed a man who had once filled stadiums, now skeletal and gaunt, barely recognizable from the rock star of 2 years before. The response was immediate and violent. Newsstands were vandalized. People tore the magazine off displays or defaced copies in protest. Not at Cazuza, but at the editors who had published something that felt, to many Brazilians, like an invasion. A journalist at the magazine requested a transfer. The public debate that followed was fierce and unresolved. But something had shifted. For the first time, AIDS was not an abstraction in Brazil. It was not a foreign disease. not a problem belonging to other people in other countries. It had a face, and the face was one of the most recognizable faces in Brazilian music. Cazuza was Brazil's first major public figure to speak openly about HIV. Across the Atlantic, Freddie Mercury, the most famous rock voice of his generation, would not disclose his diagnosis until 24 hours before his death in November of 1991. Cazuza had done it 2 years earlier, while he was still alive enough to participate in the conversation, while he still had time to record. He went back into the studio. In 1989, gravely ill, recording in short sessions because his body couldn't sustain longer ones, he made Burguesia, his last album in life. The title track was a withering critique of Brazil's comfortable middle class, their indifference, their willingness to look away from what was inconvenient. The album also contained a song called Brazil, a furious, tender, complicated love letter to a country he was leaving too soon. Burguesia was not the work of someone saying goodbye. It was the work of someone who still had things to say, still had arguments to make, still had music to leave behind. By 1990, he could no longer perform. Occasional appearances, usually seated, sometimes with an IV, were all his body could offer. He gave interviews from his home in Rio. He recorded a few final tracks that would appear on a posthumous album, Por Aí, released in 1991. On July 7, 1990, Cazuza died at home in Rio de Janeiro. He was 32 years old. The GAPA, Grupo de Apoio à Prevenção a AIDS, and other advocacy organizations had been growing in Brazil throughout the late 1980s. The public visibility that Cazuza gave to AIDS in those final 2 years of his life made the disease impossible to ignore at a national level. His openness did not cause any single law to be written. That is not how these things work. But it changed what was discussable, changed who felt entitled to speak, changed what a Brazilian could say in a newspaper or a television studio or a doctor's office. In 1991, the SUS, Brazil's unified public health system, began distributing AZT free of charge. In 1996, Brazil passed Law 9313, guaranteeing universal free access to antiretroviral treatment for all Brazilians, years before the United States, years before most of the world. Brazil pioneered the treatment of AIDS as a public health right, not a private luxury. Cazuza did not write that law, but he lived and died in a way that made indifference harder and made the conversation that led to it possible. His mother, Lucinha Araújo, created the Fundação Viva Cazuza after his death. For over 30 years, the foundation has provided support for children and adolescents living with HIV in Brazil. She wrote a book about her son. She kept his story in circulation. She made sure that when Brazil remembered Cazuza, it remembered all of him. The music and the illness together, the way he had insisted on keeping them together. In 2004, a biographical film, Cazuza, O Tempo Não Para, brought his story to a new generation. The film was a hit. A new set of Brazilians went back to the music and found that it had not aged the way they expected. Ideologia still cuts. O Tempo Não Para still lands. Brazil still asks the same questions. There is a specific kind of artist who refuses to edit themselves for comfort, who performs the difficulty of their situation rather than hiding it, who makes the audience sit with what they would prefer to look away from. Cazuza was that kind of artist. He did not make his illness into a spectacle. He made it into material, into music, into the truth of where he was. He had 32 years. He used most of them to make noise. Good, loud, necessary noise. And the last 18 months of his life, he made something else. He made a country that preferred silence finally stop looking away. If that story stayed with you, if Cazuza is a name you're going to carry with you now, there are more doors to open. Every episode of this channel goes somewhere into Brazilian music that most of the world has never been. Click on the video on your screen right now and let's go somewhere else.